corner store sits empty on a residential block, paint flaking, security gate half lowered, a faded lottery sign still taped to the window. Someone buys it for under $200,000, guts the interior, installs fresh shelving and warm lighting, stocks local produce and craft sodas, and reopens to lines around the block. The neighborhood has its heart back. The internet loves this story. The economics of that story are a different matter entirely. What you rarely see in the transformation montage is what happens in month 4, when the owner realizes that the most popular items on the shelves, cigarettes, lottery tickets, cheap beer, generate margins so thin that selling $1,000 worth might net $40 in actual profit. Or month 7, when they discover that the fresh produce they're so proud of carries a spoilage rate that eats their margins alive. Or month 14, when the rent that seemed manageable at purchase now represents an impossible percentage of revenue because the foot traffic never materialized the way the community meetings promised it would. The economics of transforming a dying corner store are not what they appear to be from the outside. They're stranger, more fragile, and more counterintuitive than almost any other small business transformation you could attempt. And the central question isn't whether you can make the store look better. It's whether you can fundamentally reinvent what a corner store is in a space that was never designed for what it needs to become. To understand why corner stores die, you need to understand what was keeping them alive in the first place, and the answer is grimmer than most people expect. A typical independent convenience store in the United States generates somewhere between $700,000 and $1.85 million in annual revenue. That sounds like a real business. But the net profit margin, what the owner actually takes home after rent, labor, inventory, utilities, insurance, and shrinkage, typically sits between 2 and 5%. On a store doing $1 million a year, that's $20,000 to $50,000 for a business that might require someone to work 70 hours a week. The reason margins are so brutal comes down to product mix. The items that drive the most foot traffic are almost always the lowest margin products. Cigarettes carry roughly a 10–15% gross margin, but are subject to state excise taxes and declining demand. Lottery tickets pay the retailer a commission of only 1–2% of sales. These categories function as loss leaders in a business that can't afford loss leaders. They pull people through the door, but they don't generate the profit to keep the lights on. Here's where the math becomes perverse. Fountain drinks, the ones from the self-serve machine, carry margins around 85%. Prepared foods run 34–60% gross margins. Health and beauty products sit at roughly 50%. These are the categories that actually make money. But in a dying corner store, these are precisely the categories that have withered. The fountain machine is broken. The deli counter closed years ago. The health and beauty section got replaced by more beer cooler space because beer at least moves volume. So the store dies the way most corner stores die, not from one catastrophic event, but from a slow migration toward lower margin products that generate just enough revenue to pay rent, but never enough to reinvest. The owner can't afford to fix the fountain machine. Can't afford to add prepared food because that requires a commercial kitchen permit, a hood vent, and staff who can cook. Can't afford to remodel because construction costs for retail space now average $155 per square foot nationally. For a 1,500 square foot store, that's over $230,000 before you've bought a single item of inventory. The store looks open, the revenue looks adequate, but the profit structure has already collapsed. By the time the lights actually go off, the business has been dead for years. Now add external pressure. Between 2000 and 2019, research from the USDA found that when a dollar store opens in the same census tract as an independent grocery retailer, that grocery store becomes 2.3% more likely to exit the market entirely. Sales at the independent store decline by 5.7% on average. Employment drops by 3.7%. Those numbers sound modest until you remember what we just established about margins. 5.7% revenue decline at a store operating on 3% net margins doesn't just reduce profit, it eliminates it. A store doing $1 million that loses $57,000 in sales doesn't go from making $30,000 a year to making a bit less. It goes from barely surviving to actively losing money. At these margins, any revenue loss is existential. And the effect is 3 times worse in rural areas. Rural independent grocery stores saw sales decline 9.2% when a dollar store entered their market. Employment dropped 7.1%. These are numbers that collapse businesses, not over years, over months. This is the environment that anyone attempting a corner store transformation walks into. You're not just renovating a building. You're trying to build a viable business in a competitive landscape that has been specifically, structurally optimized to destroy exactly the kind of store you're trying to create. So what does transformation actually cost? Not the Instagram version, the real version. Start with the building itself. If you're buying a vacant corner store, a small commercial space in a residential neighborhood, maybe 1,200 to 2,500 square feet, purchase prices vary enormously by market, but the renovation is where people's estimates collapse. Basic retail fit-out in 2026 costs between $40 and $90 per square foot for the most minimal work. That's paint, basic shelving, simple flooring. A mid-tier renovation runs $90 to $180 per square foot. If you want anything resembling a food service-capable space, proper ventilation, commercial refrigeration, a prep area, you're looking at $150 to $300 per square foot. For a 2,000 square foot store pursuing a food-forward strategy, that's $300,000 to $600,000 in construction costs alone. But construction is not where transformation budgets actually break. The hidden costs are what kills people. Refrigeration infrastructure for a store planning to stock fresh produce and dairy requires commercial-grade units that cost $2,000 to $8,000 each, with most stores needing multiple units plus walk-in cooler space. The electrical systems in old corner stores, many built in the 1950s and 60s, often can't handle the load. An electrical upgrade for a small commercial space can run $15,000 to $40,000. Then there's the permitting. A food service permit requires health department inspections. In many jurisdictions, this means a grease trap, a 3-compartment sink, specific flooring materials, and ventilation that meets commercial kitchen codes. Each of these requirements adds cost and, critically, time. Every month the store is closed for renovation is a month of rent paid with zero revenue. Working capital is the expense no one budgets for properly. Fresh food spoils. A corner store stocking produce for the first time will lose 30–40% of perishable inventory to spoilage in the first few months while they learn demand patterns. That learning period is extraordinarily expensive when you're stocking items with a shelf life of days, not months. Added up purchase, renovation, equipment, permits, working capital, and 6 months of operating expenses before break-even. For a serious transformation, you're looking at $400,000 to $800,000 total investment in a business that, if everything works perfectly, might generate $50,000 to $100,000 in annual net profit by year 3. That is not a good return on investment by any traditional financial measure, which raises the obvious question, why would anyone do this? The answer lies in understanding what the successful transformations actually become, and it's not what most people picture. The convenience store industry has undergone a quiet revolution over the past 2 decades. In 2005, food service, prepared food and beverages, accounted for just 11.9% of in-store sales at convenience stores. By 2025, that number had reached 28.5%. More importantly, food service now accounts for nearly 39% of in-store gross profit dollars. The category has more than doubled its contribution to the bottom line in 20 years. This is the only path that works. A transformed corner store cannot survive as a better version of what it was. It must become something fundamentally different, a food service business that happens to sell some retail items, rather than a retail store that happens to sell some food. The economics explain why. Prepared food carries 50–70% gross margins. A breakfast sandwich that costs you $1.50 in ingredients sells for $5. A cup of coffee costs pennies to produce and sells for $2.50. At these margins, you need far fewer transactions to cover your fixed costs. A store that previously needed 400 transactions a day selling packaged goods at 25% gross margin can now survive on 150 transactions a day if most of them involve prepared food. And this is the part that breaks most transformation attempts. Becoming a food service operation in a former corner store requires a completely different set of skills, infrastructure, and operational discipline. You need someone who can develop a menu. Someone who can manage food safety. Someone who shows up at 4 a.m. to prep for the breakfast rush. Someone who understands food cost ratios and portion control. Someone who can maintain consistent quality across hundreds of servings. You are no longer a shopkeeper. You are a restaurant operator, in a building that wasn't designed to be a restaurant, with a budget that wouldn't cover the build-out of a proper restaurant kitchen, competing against actual restaurants that have purpose-built kitchens, established supplier relationships, and trained staff. Even 7-Eleven, the world's largest convenience chain, with $13 billion earmarked for its food-forward transformation, is struggling with this transition. In fiscal 2024, the company slashed its operating income forecast by 28%, from $2.9 billion to $2.1 billion. Same-store sales declined. Traffic fell. The company closed 645 underperforming stores in 2026 as part of its pivot toward larger, food-focused formats. If a company with 60,000 locations and functionally unlimited capital finds this transition painful, consider what it means for someone with one store and a small business loan. But the economics are only half the obstacle. The other half is something most prospective buyers never anticipate until they're deep in the process: zoning. Consider what happened to Jessica Peacock in Raleigh, North Carolina. Her great-grandparents opened Peacox Community Market in 1964 in the Walnut Terrace neighborhood. For decades, it served as what she described as both a convenience store and a social hub, a place to buy a snack and catch up on community news. The store was a gathering point, particularly for the low-income community of color it served. The store closed in 2011. The building sat empty, and here's what no one tells you about dead corner stores. While they sit vacant, the zoning often changes around them. Raleigh rezoned the area to residential during the years Peacock sat empty. By the time Peacock decided in 2020 to reopen her family's legacy store, motivated partly by the neighborhood's status as a food desert, she discovered that the zoning now prohibited retail in that location. Think about what that means. A store that operated for nearly 50 years at that exact address was now legally prohibited from being a store, not because of any physical change to the building, not because the community didn't want it, they very clearly did, but because municipal zoning code had been rewritten to exclude commercial use from residential areas. Peacock spent years fighting for a rezoning variance. She won, eventually, but the process required public hearings, city council votes, legal costs, and a timeline measured in years, not months. This is not an unusual story. It is the standard experience for anyone trying to revive a long-dead corner store in a residential neighborhood. The University of Louisville has been mapping what researchers call ghost stores, former neighborhood retail sites that still bear the physical footprint of their commercial past, but have been zoned out of legal existence. They found a surprising number in Louisville alone. Across the country, these ghost stores number in the tens of thousands. Buildings that once served their neighborhoods, went dark, got rezoned, and now exist in a kind of legal limbo where revival requires navigating bureaucratic systems that were specifically designed to prevent commercial use in residential areas. The intention behind these zoning changes was often reasonable, preventing liquor stores and other unwanted commercial uses from operating in neighborhoods. But the effect was to make corner store revival extraordinarily difficult even when communities actively want it. So here's the chain reaction that actually plays out in most dying corner stores, start to finish. A neighborhood store built in the 1960s operates on thin margins for decades, sustained by cigarette sales and lottery commissions. Cigarette volumes decline steadily as smoking rates fall. The convenience store industry has watched cigarette sales erode year after year as excise taxes rise and fewer people smoke. The store loses its highest traffic product. Meanwhile, a Dollar General opens 3 blocks away, offering many of the same packaged goods at lower prices. Sales drop by 6%. On a 3% margin, the store is now losing money. The owner, often aging, often without a succession plan, can't afford the $300,000 renovation needed to pivot toward food service, can't afford to absorb losses while learning a new business model, can't compete on price with a chain store that buys at volumes 100 times greater. The store closes. The building sits vacant. The city rezones the lot. The neighborhood becomes a food desert, defined as an area where residents must travel more than a mile to reach a grocery store. Dollar stores move into these food deserts, but they stock primarily shelf-stable processed foods, high in calories, low in nutrients. The community's food options deteriorate further. Health outcomes worsen. Property values decline. The original corner store's building deteriorates. By the time anyone with capital and ambition considers reviving it, the renovation costs have doubled, the zoning prohibits retail, and the surrounding foot traffic has dispersed to other areas. One closure, one chain reaction, a decade of compounding damage. This is why the successful transformations, the ones that actually work, look nothing like the simple renovation stories the internet celebrates. The stores that survive transformation share specific characteristics. First, they're almost always in locations with above-average foot traffic and density, urban neighborhoods, not rural towns. Second, they make prepared food at least 40–50% of their revenue within the first 2 years. Third, they operate more like a cafe or fast casual restaurant than a traditional convenience store. Fourth, they usually involve an owner with either food service experience or enough capital to hire someone who has it. What a realistic success looks like: you buy a defunct corner store in a neighborhood with latent demand. You spend $400,000 to $600,000 on acquisition and renovation. You fight through permitting for 6 to 12 months. You open with a menu-forward concept, breakfast sandwiches, coffee, lunch items, supplemented by a curated selection of grocery staples. You lose money for 18 months. Your prepared food program stabilizes. You hit a net margin of 6-8% by year 3. On $800,000 in revenue, you're making $48,000 to $64,000 annually. You've invested over $500,000. Your return on investment is below 15%. You are working harder than you have ever worked in your life. That is the success case. The failure case is more common and less discussed. The renovation runs over budget. The zoning process takes longer than expected. You open and discover that your neighborhood's foot traffic was lower than estimated, or that the demographic doesn't support a prepared food concept at your price point. Spoilage eats your working capital. You can't afford staff, so you work every shift yourself. Within 2 years, you've burned through your reserves. You're in the same position as the previous owner, except you're also servicing the debt from a renovation the business can't support. Industry data tells the story plainly. Independent grocery stores operate at 1-3% net margins. Even highly optimized convenience stores rarely exceed 10%. The failure rate for new food service businesses within 5 years is notoriously high. A corner store transformation combines the worst margin pressure of retail with the highest operational complexity of food service, in a building that was designed for neither. And yet, people keep doing this. Communities keep wanting this. Cities are starting to change their zoning codes specifically to allow it. Raleigh updated its regulations partly because of Jessica Peacock's advocacy. Other municipalities are studying Louisville's ghost store maps and asking how to make revival possible instead of illegal. The reason is that the value of a corner store was never purely economic. It was never just a business. It was what researchers and urban planners call a third place, not home, not work, but the social infrastructure that holds a neighborhood together. When the corner store dies, something unmeasurable dies with it. The daily interactions, the feeling that someone knows your name, the sense that a neighborhood is alive rather than merely occupied. This is the contradiction at the heart of corner store economics. The thing that makes them valuable to communities is the thing that makes them nearly impossible to sustain as businesses. Their value is social. Their costs are economic. And no business plan has ever successfully monetized the fact that Mrs. Rodriguez stops by every morning to chat for 10 minutes without buying anything. The people who successfully transform dying corner stores aren't making a rational investment decision. They're subsidizing community infrastructure with their own labor and capital. They're accepting below-market returns because the return they actually care about isn't financial. It's seeing their block come back to life. So what is this really about? It's not about real estate. It's not about retail. It's not even really about food, although food is the only economic engine that can plausibly power a small store in the current landscape. Transforming a dying corner store is about the gap between what a neighborhood needs and what the market will provide. It's about the fact that communities need gathering places, need fresh food within walking distance, need someone behind a counter who recognizes them, and the market has decided these things are not profitable enough to exist without subsidy, sacrifice, or a level of operational genius that most people simply don't possess. Stores that died weren't killed by one thing. They were killed by the slow, compounding pressure of rising costs, declining cigarette revenue, dollar store competition, aging infrastructure, impossible margins, and a system that rezones their corpses into permanent death. Bringing one back requires fighting every single one of those forces simultaneously, with less capital and less margin for error than anyone realizes from the outside. The economics of transforming a dying corner store aren't the economics of a renovation. They're the economics of betting everything you have that a particular street corner still has a future, and that you're the person who can build a business model that didn't previously exist, in a space that wasn't designed for it, against competitors with infinitely more resources, while also being the neighborhood's social worker, food safety expert, short-order cook, and accountant. It's not a real estate flip. It's not a passion project with a viable exit strategy. It is, more honestly, a decision to personally absorb the cost of something a community cannot live without and the market refuses to provide. Every successful corner store transformation is, at its core, someone deciding that a neighborhood's social infrastructure is worth more than the rational use of their own time and money. That's not an insult. That might be the most important economic decision anyone on a residential block can make.